Isabella DeLuca's champagne glass shattered before anyone understood why she was clawing at her throat. Crystal fragments skittered across the marble floor beneath the private dining table, catching gold chandelier light as Isabella lurched sideways in her chair. A fork struck porcelain. Someone cursed. Across the room, Nia Carter froze with a silver tray against her palm, the scent of seared steak and truffle butter hanging thick in the warm air. Isabella tried to speak. Nothing recognizable came out. Bella. Marco DeLuca pushed back from the head of the table, so violently his chair scraped 6 feet across the polished floor. He caught his sister before she slipped completely from her seat. Around him, men in tailored black suits stood at once, hands moving beneath jackets before realizing there was no attacker to find. Give her room, Marco snapped. Isabella's fingers tightened around his sleeve. Her face had changed within seconds. The skin around her mouth looked flushed beneath the amber light, her lips visibly swelling as she dragged in another breath. A thin whistle escaped her throat. Nia lowered her tray onto the nearest service stand. The wine glasses trembled against one another. She had heard that sound before. Not here, where every plate cost more than half her electric bill, but years earlier in crowded clinics, and during the first aid classes she had scraped together money to attend. Call 911, Nia said. Nobody moved. Marco looked up. His dark eyes found the waitress standing beyond his security detail. What? Call 911 now. One of Marco's men pulled out his phone. She may be choking, another guest said. Check her mouth. Don't put anything in her mouth, Nia said, already moving closer. Marco raised one hand. She stopped. It was the kind of gesture that could freeze an entire room. Stay back. Nia's black server shoes planted against the marble. She stayed exactly where he ordered, but her eyes remained on Isabella. The woman's breathing had become faster, each inhale carrying that same tight, high sound. A red patch was spreading above the neckline of her cream silk dress. Marco, Isabella managed. The name came out rough and broken. His hand tightened around hers. I'm here. Water, someone said. A guest reached for a glass. No, Nia's voice cut through the room. The man paused. Marco turned toward her again. Why? Look at her lips. Marco did. Now listen to her breathing. The room became still enough to hear it clearly. Whistle. Pause. Another strained breath. Even the low piano from the restaurant speakers seemed suddenly too loud. Nia took one careful step closer. Does she have allergies? Marco stared at his sister. Bella, are you allergic to anything? Isabella's eyes fluttered. She tried to answer, but the swelling around her mouth made the word impossible to understand. Sir, Marco's man said into the phone. 911 is asking what happened. Nia pointed without touching Isabella. Tell them sudden difficulty breathing, swelling of the lips, possible allergic reaction. Tell them she's conscious but struggling to speak. Marco's man repeated every word. A moment later, heavy footsteps approached from the corridor. The restaurant manager appeared between the walnut doors, his face tightening when he saw broken crystal across the floor. Nia. He gestured sharply toward the service hall. Back to your station. Let Mr. DeLuca's people handle this. She did not move. Nia. His voice hardened. Isabella pulled in another breath. This one sounded narrower than the last. Nia looked at Marco, the man everyone in the room had been trained to obey, then at the woman collapsing against his arm. Mr. DeLuca, she said quietly, your sister isn't just fainting. Marco's gaze shifted from Isabella's swollen lips to Nia's steady face. Then tell me what you think is happening. Nia stepped toward the table. I think she's having a severe allergic reaction, and every second we spend treating this like an ordinary collapse could matter. Possible anaphylaxis, Nia said, and the words changed the temperature of the room. Marco's man repeated them into the phone while Isabella sagged against her brother, her breathing thin and noisy beneath the amber chandeliers. The scent of truffle butter still hung over untouched plates. Somewhere beyond the walnut doors, silverware clattered in the kitchen. As if nothing had happened. EMS is on the way, the man said. Dispatcher wants her kept under observation. Then observe, the manager snapped. His name was Richard Hale, and his hand closed around Nia's upper arm. You've said enough. Service hall. Now. Nia looked down at his fingers, then at Isabella. Take your hand off me. Richard released her, but immediately positioned himself between her and the table. You are a server. You are not a doctor. I never said I was. Then stop frightening our guests. Isabella dragged in another whistling breath. Nia's eyes never left her. She's already frightened. Marco rose halfway from his crouch. Enough. Nia expected the word to be aimed at Richard. It wasn't. Marco pointed toward the edge of the room. You gave us your opinion. Step back. For 1 second, Nia stood motionless. Then she obeyed, retreating behind the service stand. Richard gave her a warning look before turning toward Marco. Mr. DeLuca, we can clear the restaurant and protect your privacy. Clear this floor. Of course. Richard hurried out. Marco returned his attention to Isabella. Bella, stay with me. Her fingernails pressed into his wrist. The champagne stain on the tablecloth had spread into a pale gold circle. Nia watched from 12 feet away as one guest loosened Isabella's collar and another reached for her water glass again. She needs something, the guest said. Maybe cold water. Nia's jaw tightened. Don't give it to her. Marco's head snapped around. I told you to stay back. I'm staying back. She pointed at the glass. But she's struggling to swallow. The man hesitated. Marco looked at his sister's swollen mouth. Put it down. The glass returned to the table. Richard reappeared with 2 employees. Nia, kitchen. Immediately. She didn't move. I'm not asking again. And I'm not leaving while she's getting worse. Richard's face hardened. You want to lose this job? Nia glanced at the black apron tied around her waist, its front pocket holding a cheap pin and 3 folded order tickets. Her rent was due in 6 days. Her checking account had less than $200 in it. She untied nothing. Call the kitchen, she said. Richard blinked. Excuse me. Find out exactly what was in everything served to this table. Sauces, garnish, dessert, cooking oils. Everything. You don't give orders here. Then you do it. Nia pointed toward Isabella. Ask her brother if he'd rather know what she ate or protect your chain of command. Marco's gaze shifted to Richard. Get the ingredient list. Richard's lips parted. Mr. DeLuca, now. Richard left. Nia remained where Marco had ordered her, but the balance in the room had changed by an inch. The phone speaker crackled. Dispatcher wants to know whether she has a known allergy, Marco's man said. Marco bent close to Isabella. Bella, allergy. Do you have one? She tried to answer. Only a rasp emerged. Her left hand moved weakly across the carpet toward the chair beneath the table. Marco caught it. What? Isabella pulled away from him and reached again. Her fingers pointed downward. Nia followed the movement. A cream leather purse sat beneath Isabella's chair. She's trying to show you something. Marco reached for the purse, but Richard returned at that moment carrying a printed kitchen sheet. No obvious allergens beyond the standard disclosures, he said. Nia took one look at Isabella's worsening breathing and stepped out from behind the service stand. Marco rose. I told you to stay back. Then give me 30 seconds. His men shifted instantly. Nia stopped 3 feet away, hands visible. 30 seconds, Mr. DeLuca. Let me follow what your sister is trying to tell us, or order me out, and do it without me. Isabella's fingertips scraped weakly against the carpet, still reaching toward the purse. Marco looked from his sister to the waitress everyone had tried to silence. Then he picked up the purse and placed it in Nia's hands. 30 seconds, he said. The cream leather purse landed in Nia's hands as Isabella's next breath came out thinner than the last. 30 seconds, Marco repeated. Nia dropped to one knee beside the chair, the marble cold through her uniform pants, while the scent of champagne and truffle butter lingered above the broken crystal. Isabella, is what we need inside here. Isabella blinked once, hard. Nia looked at Marco. Open it. She's your sister. Marco pulled the zipper. Lipstick. Wallet. Keys. A phone. Nia resisted the urge to dig blindly. Ask her what she's reaching for. Marco leaned close. Bella, what do you need? Isabella's swollen lips moved. No clear word emerged. Her fingers twitched toward the purse again. The 911 dispatcher crackled through the phone on speaker. Does the patient have prescribed epinephrine? Nia turned immediately. We're checking now. Richard appeared with the kitchen sheet. The chef says the entree was prepared exactly to specification. Read the ingredients, Nia said. I already told you. Read them. Marco's voice ended the argument. Richard swallowed. Beef tenderloin, potato puree, butter, shallot reduction, truffle oil, asparagus, toasted hazelnut garnish. Isabella's eyes widened. Her left hand jerked weakly against Marco's sleeve. Nia saw it. Stop. Hazelnut. Marco bent closer. Bella nuts. Isabella blinked hard again. Once, then twice. Richard stared at the paper. The menu disclosure lists tree nuts. Was the garnish on her plate? Nia asked. A busser near the doorway answered quietly. Yes. The room changed. Nobody looked at Nia's uniform now. Tell 911 confirmed exposure to hazelnut and worsening breathing, she said. Marco's man relayed it. Nia pointed toward Isabella's phone. Check medical ID if she has it enabled. Marco lifted the device. The emergency information appeared without unlocking it. His eyes moved rapidly across the screen. Severe tree nut allergy. His voice dropped. Epinephrine prescribed. The dispatcher responded immediately. If her prescribed auto-injector is available, locate it and follow its instructions. Marco emptied the purse carefully onto the chair. A small zippered medical pouch fell beside the wallet. Isabella made a strained sound when she saw it. Nia reached toward it, then stopped herself. Marco opened the pouch. He did. Inside was a labeled epinephrine auto-injector. Richard took a step backward. Marco stared at the device as though it were written in another language. Tell me what to do. Nia shook her head toward the phone. We do exactly what dispatch says. The dispatcher gave instructions while Marco confirmed the prescription label matched Isabella. Nia stayed beside him, repeating only what was being communicated, keeping the room quiet enough for him to hear. Isabella's breathing scraped against the silence. The chandelier hummed faintly overhead. Marco followed the emergency guidance and administered his sister's prescribed medication as directed. Then he lowered the device and looked at Nia. Now what? We keep monitoring her. EMS still comes. Nobody assumes she's fine because we did one thing. Marco nodded. How long? Dispatcher. Nia called toward the phone. Ambulance is approximately 4 minutes away, came the answer. 4 minutes sounded enormous. Isabella remained against Marco's arm. Nia watched her chest, her responsiveness, the color around her mouth. Slowly, the terrible whistle in her breathing softened. Not gone. Softer. Marco heard it too. His shoulders lowered by perhaps half an inch. Richard stepped forward. So she's improving. Good. We can... No, Marco didn't even look at him. Nobody leaves. Richard stopped. Marco's gaze remained on Nia. You said every second mattered. It still does. Isabella's hand moved across the carpet. This time, instead of reaching for her purse, she found Nia's fingers. Nia let her hold them. The grip was weak, but deliberate. Red emergency lights suddenly began pulsing through the tall front windows, painting the marble walls in brief crimson flashes. Sirens rose beyond the restaurant doors. Marco looked at the waitress kneeling beside his sister, then at the manager who had tried to send her away. When those paramedics come through that door, he said, she tells them everything first. The paramedics entered just as Isabella's breathing began to tighten again. Their boots struck the marble in quick, heavy beats, and cold hallway air swept through the open doors, cutting across the warm smell of steak and spilled champagne. 2 red medical bags hit the floor beside Isabella. Severe allergic reaction, Nia said immediately. Known tree nut allergy. Possible hazelnut exposure. Her prescribed epinephrine was administered under 911 guidance. She improved briefly, but her breathing is getting tighter again. The lead paramedic looked directly at her. How long ago was the epinephrine given? Nia gave him the time. Any loss of consciousness? No. She's been responsive, but her speech became difficult. Marco remained beside his sister while the team took over, attaching monitors and assessing her airway. Plastic packaging tore open. Velcro rasped around Isabella's arm. The soft electronic beeping sounded unnaturally sharp beneath the chandeliers. Bella. Marco leaned toward her. I'm right here. Isabella's eyes found him, but her grip on his sleeve weakened. The paramedic exchanged a glance with his partner. We're moving. They prepared the stretcher. Marco immediately bent and slid one arm beneath Isabella. My car is downstairs. Hospital's 6 minutes away. No. Nia stepped between him and the doorway. Every one of Marco's men turned toward her. Richard Hale actually stopped breathing for a second. Marco straightened slowly. Move. The paramedics are already here. My driver can get her there faster. Your driver doesn't have this equipment. Marco's face hardened. Nia, you gave me 30 seconds before. Give them control now. One paramedic looked up. Sir, she's right. We need to transport her medically. Marco barely seemed to hear him. His eyes stayed on Nia. That's my sister. Then stop trying to solve this like a man who can order traffic out of his way. The room went still. Red emergency light pulsed through the windows, washing over Nia's black uniform and Marco's white shirt. You cannot intimidate an allergic reaction, she said. You cannot pay it to wait. Let them do their jobs. Richard stepped forward. Nia, that is enough. Marco lifted one finger without looking away from her. Richard stopped instantly. Isabella made a strange sound from the floor. Marco's head turned. The paramedics were already repositioning her and preparing to transfer her safely. His hands opened at his sides. Then he stepped backward. Do whatever you need. The team moved. Nia cleared the nearest chairs from their route, lifting one over broken crystal rather than dragging it through the debris. Marco's men followed, opening the walnut doors and clearing the corridor. The stretcher rolled forward. Isabella's eyes fluttered open as she passed Nia. Her fingers reached weakly beyond the blanket. Nia walked beside her long enough to take her hand. They've got you now. Isabella squeezed once. At the elevator, the lead paramedic turned. Who's coming with us? I am, Marco said. The paramedic nodded toward Nia. She has the clearest timeline and exposure details. I want her available until we have everything. Richard stared. She's restaurant staff. Marco turned toward him. Not another word. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Nia stepped back. They have what they need. I can stay. Marco looked at the woman whose cheap black shoes were wet with spilled champagne, then at Isabella disappearing beneath white emergency blankets. No, he held the elevator door. You're coming. Nia met his gaze. Only if you understand something. Marco waited. From this point forward, you don't override EMS because you're impatient. You don't demand treatment they haven't recommended. You don't make your sister's emergency harder because nobody usually tells you no. One of his guards lowered his eyes. The paramedic watched silently. Marco glanced at Isabella, then removed his phone from his pocket and handed it to his bodyguard. Cancel everything tonight. He stepped into the elevator and held the door for Nia. Until my sister is safe, the medical team decides. Nia entered. The doors began closing. Marco looked at her across the bright, stainless steel walls. And if they ask what happened, he said, you speak before I do. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and for the first time that night, Marco DeLuca had nowhere to give orders. Blue-white ceiling lights washed Isabella's face as the vehicle accelerated into Manhattan traffic, its suspension rocking beneath them while plastic equipment clicked inside metal cabinets. The air smelled of antiseptic and rubber. Nia sat strapped into the narrow side seat, her black uniform creased at the knees, watching the paramedics work without interfering. Exposure, the lead paramedic asked. Hazelnut garnish, Nia answered. Known severe tree nut allergy confirmed through her medical ID. First epinephrine? Nia gave the time immediately. Symptoms before that. Lips swelling, difficulty speaking, wheezing, worsening breathing. She stayed conscious. Marco sat near Isabella's feet, one hand gripping the steel rail until his knuckles whitened. Every answer came from the waitress before he could search his memory for it. Isabella shifted beneath the blanket. The monitor beeped steadily, but her breathing remained rough. Bella. Marco leaned forward. I'm here. The paramedic lifted a hand. Let her conserve energy. Marco stopped mid-sentence. Nia watched him swallow whatever he had intended to say. 10 minutes earlier, 3 armed men had moved when he raised one finger. Here, a paramedic could silence him with a palm. The ambulance turned sharply, and Nia's shoulder pressed against the cool wall. Isabella's eyes opened. They moved past Marco and settled on her. Nia, she whispered. It was barely audible beneath the siren. Nia leaned closer only after the paramedic nodded. Right here. Isabella's fingers shifted beneath the blanket. You knew. I knew enough to call people who knew more. Isabella's eyes closed again. Marco looked across the narrow aisle. You keep saying that. Because it matters. Most people in that room either froze or tried to take control. Those aren't the only choices. The ambulance slowed. Bright hospital lights swept across the rear windows. 30 seconds, the paramedic called. The doors opened into cold air, fluorescent glare, and the sharp squeak of stretcher wheels against concrete. A waiting emergency team surrounded Isabella before Marco's shoes touched the ground. Severe anaphylaxis, known tree nut allergy, the paramedic reported while they moved. Prescribed epinephrine administered before our arrival. A physician walking beside the stretcher looked toward Nia. Who has the clearest history? Marco pointed at her. She does. Nia walked alongside the team until the red line marking the restricted treatment area stopped her. She repeated the timeline, symptoms, exposure, medical ID information, and Isabella's response after. The auto-injector. The physician nodded. That helps. Thank you. Then the doors swung closed. Marco stood outside them, suddenly surrounded by nothing but fluorescent light, disinfectant, and the muted voices of strangers deciding his sister's next minutes. He reached for his phone by instinct, then remembered he had given it away. I could have lost her because I told you to step back. Nia looked toward the treatment doors. You changed your mind. After wasting time. Then remember the difference next time somebody without your status tells you something worth hearing. Marco lowered himself into a molded plastic chair. Nia remained standing. Where did you learn all this? He asked. First aid. CPR. Years caring for my mother when she was sick. You're not a medic. No, but you wanted to be. Nia's fingers touched the edge of her empty apron pocket. Once. Before Marco could ask more, the treatment doors opened. The physician approached, removing his gloves. Mr. DeLuca, your sister is responding. Her airway is improving, and she's stable enough for close observation. Marco's hand flattened against the chair. She's safe. She's not going home tonight, but she's moving in the right direction. His gaze shifted to Nia. Whoever recognized the reaction, located her prescribed epinephrine, and got EMS moving quickly gave us valuable time. Marco looked at Nia's worn shoes. The cheap uniform Richard had treated like proof that her voice mattered less. Then he stood. When Isabella wakes up, he said, she's going to know exactly whose voice kept everyone from wasting it. Isabella woke shortly after midnight and asked for the waitress before she asked for water. Her voice came rough beneath the soft hiss of oxygen, and blue monitor light flickered across the white blanket as Marco leaned closer to her hospital bed. Nia? Isabella whispered. She's outside. Isabella lifted 2 fingers from the sheet. Bring her. Marco opened the door himself. Nia sat beneath a fluorescent panel in the hallway, her black uniform still carrying the faint smell of restaurant smoke and spilled champagne. Her head rested against the cool wall, but her eyes opened. Immediately. She's awake, Marco said. Nia stood. Inside, Isabella looked smaller without the chandeliers and silk tablecloths around her, yet the swelling around her lips had eased. She reached toward Nia. You stayed. Nia took her hand carefully. You had a rough dinner. Isabella managed a faint smile. Understatement. Marco pulled a chair closer, but Isabella kept watching Nia. How did you know? Your breathing. The swelling. Then the allergy information on your phone confirmed what we needed to tell 911. You knew what to do. I knew enough not to pretend I knew everything. Nia glanced at the monitor. That's why we kept listening to dispatch and EMS. Isabella's thumb moved slowly across Nia's knuckles. Most people in that room were listening to Marco. Usually a popular hobby, Nia said. Isabella gave a quiet laugh that turned into a cough. Marco reached for the nurse call button, but Isabella shook her head. I'm okay. A nurse entered anyway, checked the monitor, then adjusted the blanket. 5 more minutes. She needs rest. When the nurse left, Marco looked at Nia. You said you cared for your mother. Nia released Isabella's hand and straightened the edge of the blanket. For almost 4 years. She had heart problems and diabetes. Some months we spent more time around clinics than anywhere else. That's why the first aid training. Partly. I took CPR and first aid courses because I hated standing in a room waiting for someone else to know what to do. Her fingers brushed the frayed seam of her apron pocket. After she died, I thought about EMT school. Isabella looked at her. What stopped you? Money. One word. No performance around it. Training costs money. Rent costs money. My landlord doesn't accept good intentions. Marco's eyes dropped to Nia's worn shoes. And Bellarosa? Paid immediately. Isabella squeezed the blanket. Richard tried to send you away while I couldn't breathe. Nia said nothing. Did he threaten your job? More than once. Marco's chair scraped backward across the tile. I'll deal with him tonight. No, Nia's answer stopped him at the door. Marco turned. He put my sister at risk because he cared more about hierarchy than an emergency. Then fix that. Nia stepped toward him. But don't walk into that restaurant with 6 men and turn this into fear. If everybody learns to listen only because they're afraid of you, nothing actually changes. The monitor continued its measured beep. Marco stared at her for several seconds. You're telling me how to handle my own people? I'm telling you what your sister almost paid for. Isabella lifted her hand from the bed. She's right. Marco looked between them. The room smelled of antiseptic and cold coffee. Outside the window, Manhattan lights burned silently beneath the midnight sky. Finally, he returned to the chair. Then what changes? Nia answered without hesitation. Every employee learns emergency procedure. Anyone can call 911 without permission. Nobody gets punished for reporting a medical danger. And management learns that a uniform tells you someone's job, not the value of what they know. Marco slowly nodded. Done. Nia shook her head. Don't promise me in a hospital room. Marco's eyes narrowed. What do you want? Tomorrow, take me back to Bellarosa. Isabella watched her brother carefully. Nia held his gaze. Put me in the same room where Richard told me to stay in my place, with every employee who watched it happen. Marco leaned back, studying the poor waitress who had already challenged him more times in one night than most men dared in years. And then, Nia picked up her coat. Then this time, you stay quiet while I speak. At 5:03 the next afternoon, Nia Carter entered Bellarosa through the front doors instead of the service entrance. The chandeliers were already glowing, throwing warm gold across polished marble, while the kitchen sent out the familiar smells of browned butter and roasted garlic. Her black uniform had been washed overnight, but one faint champagne stain remained near the hem. Marco walked several feet behind her. No entourage crowded his shoulders. No one reached for a door before he did. Nearly 20 employees waited around the private dining room, where Richard Hale stood beside the table Isabella had collapsed against. The broken glass was gone. Fresh linen covered the surface. Richard's tie was perfectly centered. Mr. DeLuca, he began, I'm relieved your sister is recovering. Marco said nothing. Richard glanced toward Nia. I understand emotions were high last night, and perhaps certain actions were misunderstood. Nia stopped beside the chair Isabella had occupied. What was misunderstood? Richard shifted his weight. Emergency situations are chaotic. You grabbed my arm. A refrigerator compressor hummed somewhere behind the wall. No one moved. I was maintaining control. You ordered me away while she was struggling to breathe. Because you're not medical personnel. I never claimed to be. Nia reached into her apron and placed a folded first aid certification card on the table. I'm trained in CPR and first aid because I spent years caring for my mother. That training didn't make me a doctor. It taught me to recognize when something was beyond me and get emergency help fast. Richard looked toward Marco. Marco remained silent, exactly as Nia had demanded. Last night, she continued, I recognized swelling and breathing trouble. I told someone to call 911. I followed the dispatcher. Isabella showed us where her medical information was. Her own prescribed medication was used under emergency guidance. Then EMS took over. Her fingertips rested beside the card. Nothing about that required me to pretend I was more qualified than I am. A young busser near the wall raised his hand slightly. She also stopped us from giving Ms. DeLuca water. Richard turned sharply. Another server spoke before he could answer, and she asked for the ingredient list. A third voice came from near the kitchen. Richard told us afterward not to discuss what happened with customers. Marco's gaze finally moved. Richard noticed. Standard privacy procedure. Maybe, Nia said. But telling people to stay quiet during an emergency isn't safety. Richard's face tightened. You're turning one successful outcome into an excuse to undermine management. Nia picked up her certification card. No. Isabella surviving is the reason this conversation can happen without an empty chair speaking for her. The room became completely still. Even Richard had no immediate answer. Marco finally stepped forward. My sister asked for Nia by name when she woke up. Richard swallowed. Mr. DeLuca, with respect, you've spent enough time explaining. Marco looked around the staff. From today forward, any employee who believes a guest is experiencing a medical emergency can call 911 immediately. No managerial permission. No retaliation. Richard's jaw tightened. That creates liability. So does stopping someone from calling for help. Marco placed a document on the table. Certified emergency response training begins this week. Paid time. Then he turned toward Nia. Anything else? Nia looked at the servers who had watched her being pushed aside the night before. Yes. Nobody here should have to become important before you listen to them. Richard gave a bitter laugh. And who put the waitress in charge? Marco's eyes hardened, but Nia answered first. Nobody. She untied her apron. The fabric slid from her waist and landed beside the fresh white linen. That's the point. I didn't need authority to notice a woman couldn't breathe. Richard stared at the apron. If you walk off the shift, don't come back. Nia removed her name tag and placed it carefully on top. I didn't come back for the shift. She turned toward Marco. I came back so they'd hear it from me. Marco opened the dining room door for her. Before leaving, Nia looked once at the chair where Isabella had collapsed. Last night she had risked her paycheck to remain beside it. Today she walked away from it by choice. Behind her, Marco faced Richard. She saved my sister while you protected a hierarchy. His voice remained quiet. By tomorrow morning, decide which one this restaurant can afford to lose. At 8:10 the next morning, Marco found Nia outside the hospital carrying coffee she could barely afford. The paper cup warmed her palms against the cool glass railing, and the lobby smelled of disinfectant, burnt espresso, and rain carried in on visitors' coats. Marco approached alone. His charcoal suit looked freshly pressed, but the dark shadows beneath his eyes had not disappeared. Richard resigned at 6:40, he said. Nia took a sip. That was his decision. After I gave him mine. She looked at him over the cup. Did you threaten him? No, Marco's jaw shifted. I showed him the new emergency policy and told him anyone who interfered with it would be terminated. He said he couldn't manage a restaurant where waiters were allowed to question authority. Then he answered his own problem. The elevator chimed behind them. A nurse appeared and motioned toward Marco. Your sister is asking for both of you. Isabella was sitting upright when they entered. Morning sunlight spilled through the blinds in pale stripes, warming the white sheets while the monitor beside her kept a quiet electronic rhythm. The oxygen was gone. A breakfast tray rested untouched near the window. Isabella looked first at Nia's clothes, then at her brother. You let her quit. I didn't let her do anything, Marco said. I'm learning that distinction. Isabella smiled faintly. Good. Nia placed the coffee on the windowsill. How's your breathing? Normal enough for the doctor to start talking about discharge later today. Isabella touched the hospital bracelet around her wrist. They told me what happened after I collapsed. All of it. Nia pulled the visitor chair closer. Isabella reached across the blanket and took her hand. I remember your voice telling everyone to call 911. I remember Richard trying to move you away. Then I remember seeing my medical pouch. Her fingers tightened. After that, mostly lights. Marco stood near the foot of the bed. Isabella turned toward him. Did you listen to her? Eventually. That word bothers me. Marco lowered his eyes. It bothers me too. Silence settled beneath the hum of the air conditioning. Then Isabella looked back at Nia. You lost your job because you refused to leave me. I left yesterday because I chose to. That doesn't erase what you risked the night before. Nia opened her mouth, but Isabella raised one hand. Please, let me finish. She pointed toward a white envelope on the bedside table. Marco picked it up and handed it to Nia. Inside was a letter bearing the name of a certified EMT training program, along with confirmation that tuition, required materials, uniforms, and examination. Fees would be covered. Nia stopped reading halfway down the page. No, Marco's eyebrows lifted. No, I'm not becoming somebody's charity story. Isabella's voice remained soft. Then don't. Nia looked at her. This isn't payment for saving me. Nobody can put a price on that. Isabella nodded toward the letter. It's an opportunity you said you once wanted. Take it or refuse it because of what you want, not because my brother has money. Nia looked at Marco. And what does he expect in return? Nothing, Marco said. Not loyalty. Not silence. Not work for me. Why? Marco glanced at Isabella before answering. Because last night, I watched a woman everyone treated as powerless become the only person in the room willing to challenge power when it mattered. Nia folded the letter carefully. And Bellarosa? Mandatory emergency training starts Monday. Paid. The policy you demanded is already posted in the kitchen and staff room. Isabella smiled. So apparently collapsing at dinner made my brother teachable. Nia finally laughed, quietly. Then she looked again at the letter. I'll accept one condition. Marco waited. The training program isn't only for me. Bellarosa funds annual CPR and first aid certification for every employee who wants it. Marco extended his hand. Done. Nia did not take it yet. She walked to Isabella first and placed the letter beside her hand. Then I accept. Isabella closed her fingers over Nia's wrist the same hand that had reached for her from the stretcher. Marco watched them beneath the clean morning light. 24 hours earlier, the poor waitress had been ordered away from his sister's chair. Now Isabella looked directly at her brother and said, "When I walk back into that restaurant, Nia walks beside me, and this time, everyone stands for her." 3 weeks later, Isabella DeLuca walked into Bellarosa on her own feet, with Nia Carter beside her. Conversation stopped before either woman reached the dining room. Warm chandelier light gleamed across the walnut walls, silverware chimed softly against porcelain, and the kitchen carried out the rich scent of roasted garlic and seared beef. Isabella paused beside the same table, where her body had fallen to the marble. This time there was no medical pouch hidden inside her purse. Her prescribed epinephrine was secured where she could reach it immediately, and her allergy information had been confirmed with the restaurant before she entered. A discreet card beside her place setting listed every ingredient in her meal. Nia noticed something else. Near the service station hung a bright emergency response notice. "Call 911 first. No managerial approval required." Beside it was the schedule for voluntary paid CPR and first aid certification. 12 employees had already signed their names. Marco stood near the windows, silent as promised. When Isabella entered, chairs shifted backward. Servers, bussers, cooks, and hosts rose. Nia stopped. "You didn't have to do this." Isabella looked at her. "Neither did you." The young busser who had spoken up during the staff meeting approached Nia first. "I signed up for the training." He pointed toward the notice. 6 of us from the kitchen did too. Nia ran her fingertips over the paper. No expensive plaque carried her name. No dramatic photograph had been mounted on the wall. What she had done had become procedure instead of decoration, and that mattered more. Marco approached holding an envelope. "Your EMT program starts Monday." Nia accepted it. "And the restaurant training?" "First class completed yesterday." He nodded toward a red emergency kit mounted where every employee could see it. "Second class is next Tuesday." Nia looked at him carefully. "You kept your word." Marco glanced toward Isabella. "I nearly learned too late that keeping people obedient isn't the same as keeping them safe." Isabella touched his arm, then turned toward Nia. "Come sit with me." Nia hesitated beside the table. 3 weeks earlier she had stood behind chairs like these carrying plates she could not afford to order. Now Isabella pulled out the seat beside her own. "Tonight you're not serving anybody." Nia sat. The linen felt cool beneath her palms. Marco took the chair across from them. No guard stood behind him. No manager hovered nearby. Dinner arrived quietly, every plate confirmed against Isabella's allergy. Requirements before it touched the table. Halfway through the meal, Isabella placed her fork down. "There's something I need to say while I can say it properly." The silverware around them became still. "When I collapsed here, I was surrounded by money, influence, security, and people trained to obey my brother." Her eyes settled on Nia. None of that recognized what I needed as quickly as a waitress everyone thought they could dismiss. Nia shook her head gently. "The paramedics saved you." "They treated me," Isabella said. "You made sure they got the chance." Marco lowered his glass. Isabella reached across the table and took Nia's hand. "I remember almost nothing clearly from that floor, but I remember your voice. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You weren't waiting for permission. You simply refused to leave me." Nia's thumb moved over Isabella's knuckles. "You needed help. And you saw a person before you saw a DeLuca." Isabella smiled. "That may be the rarest thing anyone has ever given me." Marco stood, but not to command the room. He walked around the table and extended his hand to Nia. She took it. "I misjudged you," he said. "I thought power meant being the person everyone listened to." His eyes moved toward the emergency notice, then back to her. "You taught me it sometimes means knowing when someone else deserves the room." Nia released his hand and looked at Isabella, alive beneath the warm chandelier light. Weeks earlier, the poor waitress had been told to step aside because she was nobody important. Yet when Isabella's life narrowed to a handful of desperate minutes, Nia's courage had made titles, money, and hierarchy irrelevant. And from that night forward, whenever Isabella remembered the hand that reached for hers on the floor, she remembered that dignity needs no permission to become powerful.